The Shadows of Change is introducing a new mechanic, Execution, which might have a massive impact on the multiplayer meta, so we'll be dedicating this video to talk about this new addition to the game. I'm sure many of you have already seen other content creators talk about this trait, allowing Yuan to instant kill any single entity models, including characters and non-characters, so a general single entity monster can also be killed by this trait, essentially reducing all single entity HP by 20%. Of course, it requires Yuan to land a hit on the target for this effect to get triggered, but when it hits, puff goes the HP and the target. Even if your unit has more speed than Yuan in his human form, he can easily use his Net of Emmentalk spell to pin down your escaping unit, preventing your unit from getting away, while Yuan slowly waddles up, delivers that killing blow, wiping out whatever's left on your unit. Personally, I think the Executioner trait on its own is acceptable, not great but acceptable. The Net of Emmentalk addition to the Cathay roster is great, but when the two combine, it creates an oppressive combo that is very hard to counter. Now let's talk about the active ability Emperor's Executioner that allows Yuan to execute targets from afar, plus doing a bunch of damage beforehand. This is amazing for finishing off weakened foes, no longer needing to invest additional resources just to chase them off or trying to deal with janky RNG to finish off the last bit of their HP. Usually the weakened target would have a blue icon on top of their character, but having the icon doesn't mean that they are executable just yet. If we move the mouse over the unit, we can see that it is only nearly executable, not quite there just yet. If we look at Kugav's HP, he has over 4k HP, but 20% of his full HP is around 2800, and we're still quite far away from actually executing the Plague Father. If we use the ability on Kugav, we can see that he took damage but didn't actually get executed. However, the actual execution threshold is higher than it looks because the Emperor's Executioner actually does damage to their target. It lasts for 2 seconds, each second does 366 damage to 732. At minimum, it can do over 700 damage, and this factors into the execution as well. Now, Kugav now has 3500 HP, which is 700 above the threshold. If we watch the ability in slow motion, we can see that Kugav is taking damage from the Emperor's Executioner, reducing his health below the execution threshold. And because Kugav is still under the effect of the Executioner ability after all that damage calculation, the execution effect still got triggered and Kugav is slain. Basically, the execution threshold isn't just the 20% HP mark, but that combined with the minimal damage from the Emperor's Execution ability, which is 732 HP. Knowing the actual threshold allows you to activate this ability earlier, making all the difference in denying your opponent from activating a crucial ability or spell. Now, this ability actually counts as spell damage, so against targets with high spell resistance, you might have to be careful on the timing of the damage, because if you use it too early, then the damage after being reduced might not be enough to push your target into the execution threshold. For example, here we have the Fate Enchantress having spell resistance and a bit of ward save from the Blessing of the Lady, a total of 75% spell resistance. Now let's try to use the ability on her and see what happens. She takes damage for sure, but that's way less than normal. If we look at the exact number, that's around 400 HP damage. Normally the minimum damage is 732, even after the ward save it would still be 600 plus, but right now we are only doing 500. So yeah, beware of resistances when you're using this ability. So how does this execution ability affect the battle? Of course, the most obvious thing is that this is a guaranteed kill on tattered characters, denying them from recovering with healing and ensure that they cannot come back for a second round of fighting. This is particularly effective in late game where the 20% on the leader is all that's holding up that balance of power and keeping the army together. You take that out and it is immediately army losses. Another thing about the execution ability is that it directly counters a lot of items and abilities that only activates when the character is under a certain level of HP. For example, the dwarves here we have the Rune Lord, the Gatekeeper's Belt. It provides 40% damage resistance when the character's HP is below 25%, making it much more difficult to knock out those last bit of HP. But with the execution mechanic, all you need is to burst down 5% of HP and the rest of the 20% will be executed. Another example is the Sisters of Twilight never getting to activate their Conjoined Destiny. It only activates when they have less than 20% health, and it takes 30 seconds to wind up. and that's more than enough time for Yuan to get close to the sisters, drop that execution ability on top of them, and watch them fall to the ground. And then there's Orion. His unique item, the Cloak of Isha, activates at 25% HP, providing damage resistance and healing that he won't be enjoying for too long. Same goes for Constantine, where his passive heal and melee defense buff activates at 25% HP. Now you might think that if there's enough healing, you might just be able to keep the HP within that 5% margin, but remember, the Emperor's Executioner also does direct damage. A minimum damage of 732 HP is more than enough to knock off those 5% HP, allowing the execution effect to go through before any healing can counteract that sudden burst damage. And don't forget about regular units who also get affected by the Executioner trait. They cannot be targeted by the Emperor's Executioner, but abilities like the Arcane Phoenix and regular Phoenix's Rebirth ability only activates at 10% HP. So unfortunately, all these rebirth, all these healing will be entirely skipped if they get hit by Yuan Bo's Executioner melee attacks. Final thoughts, I do think that the Executioner trait and any related abilities are very strong, perhaps a little too strong in the current state of multiplayer. But I do think that it can bring some positive change to the multiplayer meta because the multiplayer meta now is plagued with single entity spams. A lot of players like to abuse single entities, trying to cycle charge with them, kite with them, blobbing them up and make them extremely hard to kill with healing, and that's not a fun playstyle to play against. This Executioner mechanic is a direct counter to all the abusive single entity tactics. Personally, I don't think it's a bad change, it's just that the implementations have two problems currently. The first one is that only Yuan has access to this attribute. This gives Cathay and only Cathay a massive advantage over all other factions. There are other characters suitable for this mechanic as well, for example Ungrim Iron Fist. He has been a very weak lord in the multiplayer for a long time, and this Executioner mechanic might just make him the monster hunter he was supposed to be. Deathmaster Snikich is also a good choice, considering he is the best assassin in the entire Warhammer fantasy. And perhaps maybe, Marcus' abilities can have that Executioner mechanic as well, considering he managed to one-shot kill Taurox in the lore. The second problem is that CA might be a bit too ambitious with the 20% threshold. Lowering it down to 10% might be a bit more appropriate because right now, single entities fighting an Executioner has a massive 20% HP nerf. This doesn't sound like a lot for regular foot characters, but for large monsters with a thick health pool, for example, Dressorians, Stonehorns, or the Chaos Greater Demons, this can be thousands of HP. Now, despite the current problems, I do think that if CA can make the right adjustments to the ability and add it to other factions, the execution mechanic can be a good addition to Total Warhammer. For now, it is still too early to make a conclusion, so we'll just have to wait and see. I am curious about what everyone thinks about this new execution mechanic, so feel free to share your thoughts down in the comment section below. That's all for today. I hope you find this video useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.